I learned very early that fairness wasn't meant for me. I wasn't the oldest by much, but in our house I was labeled as the responsible one. Not because I asked to be. Not because I was better at it. It was simply decided for me. While other kids were learning how to play, how to laugh loudly, how to make messes without worry, I was learning different things. How to wash dishes properly. How to clean without being told twice. How to cook simple meals. And most importantly, how to stay quiet. I learned that silence kept the peace. I learned that doing more meant being noticed less. If I complained, I was told I was being dramatic. If I asked why, I was told this was just how families work. They said I was mature for my age. They said I was helpful. They said I should be proud. But what they never said was that it wasn't fair. The hardest part wasn't the work itself. It was being told that this was normal. That this was love. That caring more than everyone else was something I should accept without question. And I did. For a long time I believed them. From the moment I could reach the sink, I had duties. Not small ones. Real ones. The kind that came with expectations and consequences. Dishes had to be done every day. Laundry needed to be folded the right way. Floors had to be clean before anyone sat down. Trash had to be taken out without being reminded. And babysitting wasn't a favor, it was assumed. There were no breaks. No, you're tired. No, we'll do it later. Every day followed the same pattern. Something was dirty, it was my fault. Something was missing, I was asked first. If something went wrong, my name came up before anyone else's. Meanwhile, my younger siblings lived in a different version of the same house. They played. They watched TV. They left messes behind and walked away from them. When they forgot something, it was laughed off. They're too young, my mom would say. Let them enjoy life. Those words were repeated so often they became rules. Rules that didn't apply to me. I watched them grow up without pressure while I carried responsibility that felt too heavy for my age. I cleaned up after people who were only a few years younger than me. I followed rules that didn't exist for them. Somehow I was never too young to work. Never too young to understand. Never too young to handle more. We lived under the same roof, ate the same food, followed the same last name. But the rules were different. And I learned quickly that in this house, responsibility wasn't shared. It was assigned. There were no charts on the wall explaining what I had to do. No checklist. No allowance. No reward waiting at the end. I just knew. I knew when the sink was too full. I knew when the floor needed sweeping. I knew when a baby needed watching. I knew before anyone asked, because if I waited I'd be blamed. That was my real job. Not cleaning. Not cooking. But noticing everything before it became a problem. If I finished my chores, nothing was said. It was expected. Silence meant I did it right. But if I missed one thing, just one, everything stopped. Suddenly I was careless, lazy, ungrateful. No one asked if I was tired. No one wondered if I had homework. No one thought maybe I needed rest too. My siblings could forget their tasks and still be kids. I couldn't forget mine without becoming the problem. Over time I stopped waiting for instructions. I moved automatically. I cleaned without thinking. I helped without being asked. Felt safer that way. I learned that the less I needed, the easier things stayed. The quieter I was, the smoother the day went. The more I did, the less trouble there was. But that came at a cost. I didn't feel proud when I finished everything. I felt empty. Like I was useful but not important. My effort didn't earn love. It just prevented anger. And that's a hard way to grow up. I started measuring my worth by how much I could handle. By how little I complained. By how invisible I could be while keeping everything together. That invisible job followed me everywhere. Into school. Into friendships. Into adulthood. Even now I feel uneasy when I rest. I feel guilty when I say no. I feel responsible for things that aren't mine. Because back then I learned something very clearly. If I wasn't doing something for someone else, I wasn't doing enough. And no one ever told me that I deserved. As I got older, the gap only grew wider. My siblings gained freedom with age. I gained more responsibility. What started as simple chores slowly turned into full control of the house when my mom wasn't around. I became the backup parent. The problem solver. The one everyone called when something went wrong. If my siblings argued, I was told to handle it. If they made a mess, I was told to clean it. If they were bored, I was told to keep them busy. And if I ever said I couldn't, the response was always the same. You're the oldest. You know better. Just help out. Those words followed me everywhere. I watched my siblings grow up without pressure, without fear of making mistakes. They could be loud. They could be careless. They could say no. I couldn't. I was expected to set the example even when no one set one for me. I was expected to give even when I was running on empty. There were days I wanted to be careless too. Days I wanted to leave dishes in the sink and walk away. Days I wanted to sit down and do nothing. But I didn't. Because I knew what would happen if I did. The house would feel tense. Voices would rise. And somehow it would all come back to me. So I learned to hold everything together quietly. I learned to swallow frustration. I learned to keep going even when I was overwhelmed. No one noticed how heavy it felt. They only noticed when something wasn't done. Over time I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped asking questions. I stopped hoping things would change. I told myself this was just how life worked. That some people carry more. That some people are chosen to be strong. But strength wasn't something I chose. It was something I was pushed into. And the hardest part wasn't the work or the responsibility. It was realizing that my needs came last. Every time. I wasn't allowed to be tired. I wasn't allowed to be frustrated. I wasn't allowed to need help. Because in that house, I wasn't seen as a child. I was seen as the one who could handle everything. Eventually, something inside me started to change. Not all at once. Slowly. Quietly. I stopped expecting anyone to notice how much I was doing. I stopped waiting for appreciation. I stopped believing things would ever be balanced. Instead, I focused on getting through each day. I learned how to move without making noise. How to finish tasks without being seen. How to take up as little space as possible. Felt easier that way. Safer. But deep down something hurt. I watched my siblings grow without the weight I carried. They were allowed to make mistakes. I was expected to fix them. They were comforted when they were overwhelmed. I was told to be strong. That difference stayed with me. It shaped how I saw myself. I began to believe that rest was something you earned, not something you deserved. That love came after effort. That asking for help was a weakness. Those beliefs followed me into adulthood. Into how I work. Into how I care for others. Into how I ignore my own needs. And even now, I have to remind myself of something simple. I wasn't asking for too much back then. I was just asking to be treated like a child too. There's a moment I still think about. Not a big argument. Not a dramatic scene. Just a small, quiet moment that made everything clear. I remember standing in the kitchen tired after a long day. The sink was full again. The floor needed cleaning. My siblings were in the other room laughing completely free. I asked for help. Not much. Just someone else to take one task. My mom looked at me and said, "Why are you making a big deal out of this?" That sentence stayed with me. It told me that my tiredness didn't matter. That my effort was expected, not appreciated. That fairness wasn't something I was allowed to ask for. After that, I stopped asking. I did what needed to be done and kept my feelings to myself. I learned that speaking up only made things harder. Silence felt like the better option. But silence has a cost. It builds resentment. It turns exhaustion into anger. It teaches you to ignore your own limits. Years later, I understand something I couldn't back then. I wasn't wrong for wanting help. I wasn't lazy for feeling tired. I wasn't ungrateful for wanting things to be shared. I was just a kid who was carrying too much. And now, when I look back, I don't feel shame for feeling that way. I feel clarity. Because what I went through wasn't about chores. It was about being treated differently. About growing up under rules that didn't apply to everyone. And understanding that truth is the first step. To finally letting go of the weight I was never meant to carry. As I got older and gained distance from that house, I started to see things more clearly. What I lived through had a name. It wasn't just helping out. It wasn't just being responsible. It was being treated like a solution instead of a child. I was there to fill gaps. To prevent problems. To make things easier for everyone else. And because I did it well, no one questioned whether I should be doing it at all. I realized how early I was trained to ignore my own needs. How quickly I learned to put everyone else first. How normal it felt to be exhausted. That kind of conditioning doesn't disappear when you grow up. It follows you. In school, I took on more than I should. At work, I overperformed and burned out. In relationships, I gave more than I received and called it loyalty. I thought that was just who I was. But it wasn't. It was something I learned in that house. I learned that love came with conditions. That approval came after sacrifice. That rest was a reward, not a right. Unlearning those lessons has been slow and uncomfortable. I still feel guilty when I say no. I still feel anxious when I rest. I still feel responsible for other people's emotions. But now I notice it. And noticing is powerful. I'm learning that being capable doesn't mean being obligated. That helping doesn't mean disappearing. That I don't have to earn my place by carrying everything alone. I'm learning that fairness isn't asking for too much. It's asking for what should have been there from the beginning. I can't change how I was raised. I can't go back and give my younger self the balance they deserved. But I can choose something different now. I can choose rest without guilt. I can choose boundaries without apology. I can choose to stop measuring my worth by how much I do for others. This is me finally setting down the weight I carried for years. Not in anger. Not in blame. But in honesty. Because I was never meant to hold everything together by myself. Today when I look at my siblings, I don't feel anger toward them. They didn't create the rules. They just lived inside them. What I feel is a quiet sadness for the version of me that didn't get the same softness. The version of me that learned responsibility before comfort. The version of me that learned how to serve before being seen. I think about how different my childhood could have been with just a little balance. A little shared effort. A little understanding. Instead, I grew up believing that love was something you proved through work. That being needed mattered more than being cared for. That my role was to hold things together no matter the cost. Those beliefs shaped how I moved through the world. I stayed in situations longer than I should have. I overgave even when it drained me. I ignored my own limits because that felt familiar. But healing doesn't come from pretending it didn't hurt. It comes from telling the truth. The truth is I was asked to carry more than my share. The truth is that wasn't fair. And the truth is, it left marks that took years to understand. I don't tell this story to blame. I tell it to name what happened. Because when you name it, you stop questioning yourself. You stop wondering if you were too sensitive. You stop minimizing your own experience. I'm learning to be gentle with myself in ways I wasn't allowed to be back then. To rest without explaining. To say no without guilt. To take up space without apology. That younger version of me deserved that gentleness. And even though I can't give it to them in the past, I can give it to myself now. This story isn't about chores. It never was. It's about how uneven responsibility can shape a person. How being treated as the strong one can become a quiet burden. And how choosing to heal is an act of strength too. I'm still learning. Still unlearning. Still growing. But for the first time, I'm doing it for myself.